All right, so last we met, we were talking about Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland is a very interesting individual, and you'll see why when we get a little bit further. So we're up to the election of 1888. Cleveland is the first Democrat since the Civil War to win election to the presidency. And this year, in 1888, the election's key issue is tariff reform. Now, every election has a key issue. In 2000, much like 1888, it had to deal with the surplus. A surplus had come into the Treasury. What is a surplus? It's what?
Like too much of one item.
Okay, so if we're talking about a surplus in the Treasury, what are we talking about? Too much money had come in. Now, where does the money come from? Where do we get the money for our government at this time period?
Tariff.
Comes from tariffs. All right. So what does that tell you about the tariff in 1888?
Strong.
Okay. Now, I know you guys, when you think about having money, you think, I can never have enough money, right? You have a surplus of money, you think that's a great thing. But if you have a surplus in federal treasury, what has happened? The government cannot spend the amount of money that it has brought in. That is too much, yes? Is that a good thing? Why isn't it a good thing? If we're talking about the economy as a whole, yes. If we're talking about the government, if the tariff is bringing in too much money, then it is too high, right? Now, in 2000, the issue was we were supposed to have a surplus in 2007 with our federal treasury. Did that work out? No, we didn't, because what happened on September 11th, 2001? 9/11, 2001, right? And then we went to war. So any money that was forecast to be had 7 years after the 2000 election is not, never shows up. However, at this time period, there actually is a surplus. So in this election, there is a surplus. The government has too much money. Cleveland, through the Mills veto, had tried to get rid of the surplus or actually cut it down, by lowering the tariff rates. If the government has too much money, that means they are charging you too much money. How many of your parents are already dreading April 15th? What's April 15th? Tax day, right? That's when you have to have your taxes in. Now, those who are lucky get money back from the government in a tax refund. A tax refund. If you get a tax refund, it means you overpaid and the government is giving you your money back. Well, in this issue right here, you have overpaid. Is the issue the government should lower the rate and give you your money back? No, it isn't, because they're not thinking that way. They're thinking one of two things. One, we're going to keep the money we have, but should it be lower? Should the tariff rate be lower? The Democrats say, yes, it should be lower. The Republicans say, no, it is fine the way it is. Why? Which side are the Republicans on at this time period? Big business. Well, if they're big business, why are they interested in taxing imports? Who does taxing imports help? The companies in the country itself that are able to produce the same item cheaper, but because there is a tax on it, the government is saying it's going to be more expensive. Remember my example of steel. To buy this steel, English steel, instead of buying it from the United States. You buy it from the United States, and it is going to be cheaper because the government made it that way. So the Democrats renominate Grover Cleveland. The Republicans nominate the senator from Indiana, Benjamin Harrison. In this election, we have, for the first time, a president win the popular vote, but lose the election. Cleveland wins a majority of the popular vote. Does the popular vote mean anything? No, because we have the Electoral College. In the Electoral College, Harrison wins. Now, how is that possible, you say? Well, you have to go back and look at the Constitution. The Constitution states that in a federal election for president, each state will cast votes for their candidate. That vote depends on the number of representatives and senators that state has. Today, there are 538 electoral votes. You need 271 to win the presidency. When you go and vote, this year, you will go and vote in a presidential election. However, you will not vote for the president. You will not vote for the candidate for the president of the United States. What you will vote for in turn is a slate of electors in Texas that are chosen by the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. At the end of the day, whoever gets the most votes, Republican or Democrat, that slate of electors will then give all of their electoral votes to, let's be honest here, it's Texas, the Republican candidate. Okay? If you vote for a Democrat in the United States, vote for a Democrat in Texas, you're throwing your vote away. Why? Because Texas is an all or nothing state, and Republicans will win Texas. Because that's what happens. In this election, Cleveland wins the popular vote. Just like in 2000, Al Gore won the popular vote. However, popular vote doesn't matter. What matters is votes by state. If we break it down that way, who wins? In 2000, it was George W. Bush. In 1888, it is Benjamin Harrison. So Harrison comes in as the president of the United States. Now, to try to solidify the Republicans' control of the House and the Senate in Congress, Wyoming and Idaho are going to be brought into the Union to help grow the number of voters for the Republican Party and then, of course, electoral votes. Harrison, have you heard this name before, Harrison? What?
William Henry Harrison.
William Henry Harrison was his grandfather. This is the first grandfather and grandson, actually only, to become president and president. We've had two presidents, before presidents, who've been father and son. Who are they? Bush and Bush, Adams, and John Quincy Adams. All right? So this is a father-grandson relation. Harrison is very pro-business, very on the side of growing the United States industrial base. One of the first things he does is he signs into law the Dependent Pensions Act for the Civil War, which extends pensions to Union Civil War veterans' widows. And it lowers the age of service down to 90 days. Abby, can you not read it? I mean, what's wrong? You all right?
Oh, no, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Can everybody read that? Is that too small?
No.
We're good in the back? Okay. All right. So the Dependent Pensions Act extends pensions to widows, and it also lowers the term of service down to 90 days. So here's an interesting question that somebody brought up a couple years ago that I looked up. And the question was, when was the last Civil War widow, when did the last Civil War widow die? When did the Civil War end? What year? 1865? Yeah. Okay. When did the last Civil War widow die? Take a guess.
1900.
Okay, that's a good guess. What else?
1930.
1930. What else? You're way off.
Really? 1897? 2001?
Very close. 2004.
Really?
Yes.
What?
Just because
Jeez, baby.
she married a veteran
Okay.
in 1924. Married a veteran in 1924. She died in 2004. We paid all the way through 2004 because she was a widow of a Civil War veteran. Yeah.
How old was he when they got married?
Let's see. Let me see if I've got that. He actually died in 1921. They got. Let me rephrase that. He got married in 1920.
Okay.
1921, he died. So let's say he started 90 days before the end of the Civil War. So let's say he started in 1865. Let's say he was 15, which is very plausible. By the time he 1850, he was 70 when they got married.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
Life choices.
The Sherman Silver Purchase Act is going to be a boon to the government, actually the silver miners. And as you can see, it is going to buy silver to put in the market to redeem greenbacks. Now, this is an additional $4.5 million per month. How much were we putting in already? 2 to 4 million. So now we're buying possibly $8.5 million per month of silver to put into the economy. Why would we do this? Other than the silver interests. What's another reason? When we went to the gold standard through the Coinage Act of 1873 and did away with all the silver in the economy, we cut down on the amount of money in circulation. Therefore, if money is not as easy to get, the purchasing power of it goes up. You buy more with it. That's called deflation. Now, if you are a farmer and you have a $100,000 loan on a bank, and that bank, when you have, it says you are going to make payments for the next 30 years, all right? Does that bank contract for $100,000, does that fluctuate with the price of money? No, it does not. It's always $100,000. So if the price of money goes down, or the purchasing price of money goes down, there's less money on the market, and it's harder for you to pay bills. What's going to happen? Is there a chance you're going to lose your farm? Yes, because you can't make payments. So what happens is farmers want more money in the market. They want more silver to be coined and placed into the market, because then what happens is like the example I used in the last class. Marty McFly goes to the year 2015 and buys a Coke with a $50 bill. How much change does he get? None. Why? Because $50 buys you a Coke. That's inflation. What it was 30 years ago in 1985 bought you a Coke for 50 cents. Now it buys you what? Now the same drink costs, well, in the movie it's $50. Okay, so inflation. So what happens is they're hoping to get more money into the market to make it easier for them to pay off their bills. The problem, though, is that when you keep putting money into the economy, you're going to lead to inflation. And you're going to actually be able to buy less goods with that. Another thing that passes during this time period is the McKinley Tariff. McKinley Tariff is going to do with the old one. It's going to be the highest rate ever to this point. It's going to raise taxes to 48%. Now, who does this really hurt? What was the question on your quiz? Does it hurt farmers? The answer is yes. The reason it hurts farmers is because farmers typically are typically cash poor. In crops, they can have a lot of money. But what happens is in the typical process of shipping goods to market, what happens is when you send something, let's say out of Savannah, and you're sending your cotton to England, you don't have money. What you do have is you have an agent who's going to take care of this for you in England. The agent receives your goods coming into England. They have to pay a tax, an import tax, and they will sell your goods. Most likely, you gave them a list of things that you needed. You wanted a chair, you wanted a new dining set, you wanted some dresses for your daughters, what have you. And what occurs is then that agent will buy those goods, those finished goods, and then will ship them back over to Georgia, back to you. Now, because those are finished goods, they're on the tariff list, what's going to happen? You're going to pay a tax on them for when you come back in. Now, could you have easily gone from Georgia to New York and bought that same dress? Yes, you could have, but what do you typically not have on you that precludes this from occurring? Money. Why? Because everything that farmers typically do at this time period is through credit. Okay? You ever heard somebody say they're land rich but cash poor? You got a lot of land, but you have no cash. Why? Because what do? You grow, you ship, you trade, it comes back, and then you have to be taxed on it. So any actual cash that you might have is not going to be used for this. Now, I mentioned big business a lot. Big business is really going to take off in the latter half of the Civil War. One of the best technological innovations that is going to change how society and industry works is the Corliss steam engine. In 1876, it is patented. It is created by George Henry Corliss, and one of the fascinating things about this is that it is 30% more efficient in generating power than previous steam engines. Previous steam engines had a tendency to explode. Not a good thing. How many guys have ever seen a pressure cooker? What's a pressure cooker? How do you work with the pressure cooker when your mom's like maybe making beans? My mom always used a pressure cooker to make beans. You have this device. It looks like a pot with beans in. You put the water in, put whatever seasoning you're going to put in on it. You put the top on it, and depending what type of top it is, it either slides or it screws down. And what happens is you boil it. And you boil it, and the pressure will build up in it. And once it builds up in it, it will make the pressure will make whatever you're cooking a lot tender. However, if you don't use it right or forget about it, that top can explode off because it's under such tremendous pressure. Steam engines, the first steam engines were like that. They would explode. However, the Corliss steam engine takes care of that issue. And it is 30% more effective than previous steam engines. Now, remember when we were talking about the difference between amount of industrial factories in the United States right after the Civil War, after Reconstruction? Where were they primarily located? In the North? Why? Railroads was something else. Railroads went to the factories. There was something you could not move that existed more in the factory in the North than in the South. The type of water available. They were all water powered. As a result, if a river was coming off of a mountain, it runs faster than if it's in a prairie. Therefore, it generates more power by using a water wheel. Thanks to the Corliss steam engine, you can put a factory anywhere. Doesn't matter where it is placed thanks to this Corliss steam engine. You can put it right next to whatever shipping concerns you have. If you are able to put it there, let's say you could put, let's talk about a dress. You can make a steam engine powered loom. And now you can put it right next to the cotton fields. What does that mean? In the old days, what did you do? You took the cotton, you harvested it, you shipped it to where? New York. Okay, that's where the factory was. Then they would convert it, they would make it into a finished product, they would make it into a dress. Now, because that's where the water was, that's where the resource that you needed to make it existed. Now, you harvest the cotton, you take it next door, they make it into a loom. I'm sorry, they make it into fabric, and then it goes right next door to be made into a dress. Because you can do that now with the Corliss steam engine. In 1879, Thomas Edison finally gets it right with the light bulb. You've seen the famous saying that he never failed. He just came up with 30,000 different ways to not be successful. A lot of that was with the light bulb. How does the light bulb change society? How can you work on it? Work at nighttime. You can work when you are not typically or have not been able to beforehand. 1876, Alexander Graham Bell creates the telephone. This revolutionizes business because you can have facilities all across the nation and you can have one person be in charge of it. It makes business a lot easier to control and manage. One of the major problems, and I use this as an example a lot, in building the infrastructure in the United States is the problem of good, high-quality steel. Steel has always been around. The problem is that it's very difficult to make. Why? If you were to take a vat of iron and you would smelt it down, okay? You smelt it down, glowing red hot, you would notice that there's all these little things on that would float up to the top of it. And what those are impurities. And these impurities, if not removed, make it exceptionally difficult to make high-quality tempered steel. So let's think about it. A sword. You make a sword. The sword is made out of steel. It has an impurity in it, and you go to attack your opponent with it, and his sword hits your sword on that impurity. What's going to happen? The blade is going to snap, and you are going to die. All right? Therefore, it is very difficult to make high-quality steel. And those who can make it are very expensive. Charge a lot. Enter the picture Henry Bessemer. Henry Bessemer, at his smelting, his refinery, ironworks facility, notices one day that a wind is blowing in from the open door. Now, obviously, you can imagine it's exceptionally hot this way, yes? In a factory that does nothing but melts iron and tries to make steel, it's going to be exceptionally hot. He knows that when he notices that a cold wind is blowing in, and it blows over the top of one of his vats. As it blows over the top of one of his vats, all the impurities that have risen to the surface go over to one side. As a result, he can take a piece of stick or something and just push all those impurities off. The result is a much quicker, more efficient, a much more cheaper way to make steel. So he replicates this process by putting giant fans that blow over these vats. Substantially cuts down the price of steel. making it much cheaper for us to use. And it soon becomes the building item of choice. Now, previously, what did we use for building the inside of houses and buildings? What was used? Wood. How many stories can you go with wood before just the sheer weight of it collapses? Typically about 3. And after that, you need to look at steel. So now that's going to change matters. In 1859, Colonel Edwin Drake in Titusville, Pennsylvania, is going to bring in the first oil well. Now, oil had existed since the dawn of time. Indians knew about oil. They used it to smear it on their bodies for paint, for markings, and usually to keep off insects and bugs. At first, the first oil well, what's going to come of it is going to be the use of its use as an illuminant. It's going to be a cheap way to light lamps. However, when you think of oil today, what do you think of? Gas, and inside your car. Plastics, absolutely. But the oil that your engine needs to be a lubricant. So what this does is it spurs business expansion. All of these items put together are going to lead to the second United States Industrial Revolution. Did it jump 2 on me? What can you do with cheaper, easier to get steel? How many guys have ever been to New York? Okay, been on the Empire State Building? Top of the Empire State Building. Get to the top of the Empire State Building. You are able to look out and look around all downtown New York. And one of the buildings that you see is this weird shaped building that looks like a triangle. It is the infamous Flatiron Building. And for at one period of time, it was the tallest building in the world with 7 stories because it used steel for construction. Railroads are going to easily expand to new areas using the more high-quality steel rails. And, of course, the demand for the items needed for the Civil War required there be some form of production. What did they need during the Civil War? They needed bandages. They needed carts. They needed uniforms. They needed bullets. They needed gunpowder. All these items create a need. And a business expands to take care of these areas, fill these areas. Now, eventually, by the time we get to the 1880s, industry is finally going to come to the South. What was the big problem that the South had prior to the Civil War from the very beginning? And it kept them from being an industrial complex? The lack of water to generate power. As a result, the Corliss steam engine takes care of that. Another thing that the Civil War does is it provides a cheap form of labor. Those are the former slaves, the freedmen. As we talked about in the old days, as we talked about the last time we met, there was a large percentage of income, a large percentage of immigrants coming from Ireland, from Europe, and on the West Coast, what? China. They were willing to work for exceptionally little. So as a result, big business was able to pay them exceptionally little and make more of an income. Because of this, they were able to take more profit. They were able to take this profit and reinvest it and to expand to other areas. As I already stated, plants are going to be built next to the raw materials, thus making it quicker to produce a finished good. And the incorporation of new technology expedites manufacturing. The light bulb. No longer are you able to only work while the sun is up. You can work through the night. The telephone. Managers can stay in touch with their factories that they can't get to in a day's drive or a day's ride at this point. Now, what do you think? Is this all well and good? No? Why not? Allison, why do you say no?
I mean, the only people that were working, like, at the bottom level of the factories were immigrants and so that's only like one part of the bill.
Okay. You have a very small workforce, well, very small population at that level of the workforce. You have immigrants, you have former slaves, and there's also no children in there too. We didn't have any child protection laws at the time period. My daughter Hannah is now 16, but when she was about 10, she loved American Girls, and one of the things that she watched a lot were the American Girl movies. Now, there was this one American Girl movie, I can't remember which one it was. It was the girl that lived during this time period. And this girl goes to what was known as a sweatshop, which is one of these factories that was run by immigrants and had child labor. And it was a sewing factory. And they had these little kids that were there for hours on end, and they were sewing. You know, they put these things through it. Because it's all based off of the cordless engine, the power was always there. So the kids would press a pedal, and they would put the item to be sewed through the sewing machine. And this one scene, and it was pretty graphic, I thought, for a 10-year-old girl. This boy falls asleep while he's putting it through, and his hand goes through, and it stitches up his hand too, and he starts screaming. And the owner comes out and is like, "What did you do? What did you do?" And he sees this, he goes, "Take this boy away." He takes him and he throws him out. And they bring another boy in there, little, like 8, 9, 10-year-old boy, sits him down, and he continues to work. Now, that seems kind of drastic, right? But that's what happened. There were no protections against the workers, which is kind of what I'm trying to get Allison to get to. Yes, that's exactly right. There was no protection against the workers. The business owners were able to do whatever they wanted, and if the person didn't like it, well, that's fine. You could be fired, and they bring someone else that worked for you. It's the same issue we have now. Why are we having such a hard time closing the borders? Could we close the borders very easily? Absolutely. The southern border, you just put a whole bunch of tanks down there and shoot anybody that comes across. Very simple to do. We're not going to do it, though. Why?
That, like, for training, it's kind of messed up.
Why?
Morally,
Why?
you're shooting a person.
Yeah, but they're trying to come into our nation. They're trying to invade our country.
You have a tank.
Yeah, they're trying to come into our nation. We have laws. We have laws. They say you can't do that. Okay, let's get rid of the tank. You don't like the tank idea. You put a guy there with an M16.
You're still shooting at people.
It doesn't matter. They're coming into our nation. How do you know that guy's not with ISIS bringing a bomb in?
I guess you have to shoot him.
That's right. You shoot him. You know what? I love this. This is, you're giving me this example. Mexico encourages their people to come to the United States. You know why?
Because they have opportunities for us.
Because
money towards Mexico.
the second highest form of income from Mexico, to Mexico, is their citizens in the United States sending money back. Okay? So if we were to stop that, they would not be able to meet their, cut off a nation's second form of income. The first one is oil. We'll talk about that in about.
Yes, they don't like Trump.
They what?
Yes, they don't like Trump.
Well, no, they probably don't. But look further down at Mexico and their southern border, and what is Mexico's own policy? What is Mexico's own policy of people coming into Mexico from the south into the north?
Don't.
They're executed. They don't want them coming in. They want to send their people to the United States because they in turn send money back and they don't have to take care of them. However, those who come in illegally to Mexico are killed. It's how it goes. So let's say, so back to my example. Could we do it? Yes. Yes, we could close the border. We don't want to because what are these Mexicans, and I'm not trying to be rude, I'm saying people from Mexico coming in to the United States, Mexican citizens coming to the United States, what are they doing? Doing cheap labor that Americans refuse to do. So, consolidation of business is going to occur at this time. And basically, consolidation is large companies are going to buy up small companies. They're going to do this to try to increase their profit, and they are going to try to cut out competition. Now, if you cut out competition, what do you have? What's it called? It's called a monopoly, right? Everybody's played the monopoly game. What happens when you get Park Place and Boardwalk? Okay, and you put, on Park Place and Boardwalk, you put 2 hotels. How much money do you make? A lot. Why? You have a monopoly on the most prized area of the game. I always win because I buy the cheapest places, and I always put hotels on them quicker. Prevent people from getting those areas. But still, it's monopoly. You control every aspect of that game. Now, there's 2 different types of monopolies. The first is called horizontal integration, and that is best exemplified by John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil. What is Standard Oil known as today?
Petroleum?
The company. Not Texaco. Texaco is Texas. Put a tiger in your tank. What? Nope. Exxon. Exxon. Standard Oil is Exxon. So what is horizontal integration? You buy all your competitors around you. You go somewhere, these are all gas stations. You bought every single one of them in the area. Every store is an Exxon store. It's a Standard Oil store if you're going to buy oil. In horizontal integration, you buy every aspect across the board. There is no competition in gas stations. All right? So if you were to leave here and you were to go up to William Joel Bryan, where it crosses Highway 6. There are 4 gas stations there. There's a Kroger, there is an Exxon, there is a Shell, and there is a Valero. Under horizontal integration, they would all be Exxon, because that is Standard Oil. You own every single aspect of distribution. Follow? Across the board, it's what? Horizontal. Next is the American Steel Corporation, best exemplified by Andrew Carnegie, and it is vertical integration. In vertical integration, let's get fun with this. You own the land that they dig the ore out of. Let's put a claw on that. My favorite teacher always drew on the board. Loved it. That's how I remembered everything. He always talked to the people, so I don't talk to the people. I think it's a little bit much. But my wife had them. Same teacher. She couldn't stand them. She couldn't stand them. Because he was always drawing on the board. And I was like, yeah, that's the best part of it. And when I first started teaching, she said, you better never draw on the board. And I've never answered that question. So you own that. Okay, that's the land. We're digging up the iron ore. All right? What's next? What's the next step in production?
Truck.
Truck, yeah. Okay, so we're going to draw a truck. Put a dump truck on it. Okay, so there's the truck. All right, where's the truck go?
Honoring.
Goes to a factory, right? Put some pipes up there, okay? All right, so there you go. There's a factory. It's going to smelt it, okay? And it's going to make the finished product. The finished product is going to be loaded on a, or a, let's go with something else. Let's put it on.
Train.
Put on a train. All right, so then next is the train. Let's see, put a cab up here. Big old boxcar on it. Okay? And it takes it to, I'm not going to draw on the wall. But what is it the train takes it to market. And the market is owned by American Steel. Every single aspect in vertical integration is owned by the company. So from the moment it comes out of the ground to the moment the end user purchases it, it is what? It is controlled by one corporation. These are both types of monopolies. Now, at the very beginning of attempted regulation, we'll talk more about that in a little bit, there would be attempts to try to control these monopolies because people really don't like monopolies and they want to keep it from occurring. But when you think of New Jersey, what do you think of? Think of what?
Jersey Shore.
Jersey Shore. Thank you. Somebody knows. Okay. When you think of the people from Jersey Shore, are you thinking these are fine, upstanding human beings? No, you're not. You're thinking these guys are scum. All right. Chris Christie. When you think of Chris Christie, he's the governor of New Jersey. I mean, does he seem like the most ethical human being to you? This is a guy who wanted to get at New York, so he purposely arranged, it's never been proven in the court of law, purposely arranged to close down the George Washington Bridge at rush hour so that people couldn't get into New York from New Jersey. And he did that on purpose.
Why?
Because he wanted to stick it to New York.
That's dumb.
Yes. So here's the deal. And he wants to be your president.
Well, he's losing.
So here's the deal. In New York, the state of New York would make laws prohibiting people from owning so much stock that they would, or they would be able to buy up other companies. Because that's how you got these different levels. Okay? So what would happen is I, who is very flush with money, I own quite a bit of oil companies. I want to buy out my competitors. So I'm going to buy up 51% of Shell's stock, and I'll have controlling interest in it. Well, New York put a rule out that said you can't do that. You can't do that. That's not fair because you are using your money to buy up other companies to try to drive them out of the market. So when New York does that, New Jersey comes along and says, ooh, we don't care, you can do it over here. Come to us, we'll let you do it. And so what happens is New Jersey, in the 1889 New Jersey Holding Company Law, said that it was legal for companies to own other companies. So now what happens is if I was to buy money, if I was to take money and buy stock in this corporation and give them money, that corporation could buy up every single aspect of that production stream. Now guess who owns that company? I do. I created it in New Jersey. I then invested my own money in it, and under the New Jersey law, to buy up other companies and create monopolies. These are called trusts because you put money into it, and they would buy up other companies. A trust is a company created to do nothing but own other companies. Okay? Standard Oil. What do? They are a company that does what? Produces oil. Yes? So let's call it Franke International. Franke International doesn't make anything, but it owns Standard Oil and American Steel Corporation, and that is what it does. That's all it does. It's a company that owns other companies, designed under the holding company law of 1889. Does that make sense? No. Thank you. The reason it doesn't make sense is probably because I didn't do a good job on it. How do you buy other people out? What is a hostile takeover? Have you ever heard of a hostile takeover back in the 80s? That was a big thing about movies. There was this movie called, what was it called? I don't know. Michael J. Fox was in it. All the movies had Michael J. Fox in it. And what happened is this guy had a company. And his nephew came to work for him. Well, his uncle, the guy who had it, was a real sleazebag. And the end result is that his company, which was a big company, was about to get bought out by another company. Because that company, the second company, was buying stock. And if you get 51% of the shares of stock, you own the majority of that company. And you can tell them what to do. Does that make sense? Abby, yes? Okay. Yes? I want you to be honest. If you're not understanding this, tell me. Okay? And the kicker is at the meeting where the second company met with the first company saying, we're buying you out, Michael J. Fox's guy showed up, just comes swaggering in at the last second, and he's like, hey, how you doing? They're like, what are you doing here? This is a meeting to talk about us purchasing this company. He's like, yeah, but guess what? I put all this money together, and we now own 51% of your stock. So he bought out the guys buying out the other guys for his uncle's company. Kind of confusing, but if you control 51% of the stock, you control that company. So let's say I have a better analogy here. I own Exxon. New York says, therefore, I cannot buy Shell stock. Follow? New Jersey says, no, you can, but guess what? If you create a second company and invest in it, that company can buy a Shell stock. So I say, here we go. I'm going to do that. So New Jersey, New York. It's just the Hudson River. You go to the other side of it. I create a company. I give that company money. That company then buys 51% of Shell's stock. I own it through a second company. Therefore, then I say, because I own 51% of the stock, Shell, sell all of your company's, she sells seashell by the seashore. Shell, sell all of your gas stations to Exxon for $1. Do they have to do it? Yes. Why? Because you control the stock. All right? And therefore, I am forcing Shell to sell to me, putting them out of business. Now, does that you follow that? Okay, good. All right. Now, there are a lot of people that are rightfully concerned. Now, somebody should have thought in their mind, well, hey, that example that he just gave us, that's pretty corrupt. That's not ethical. That's wrong. Did anybody think of that? Okay, good. Good. Here's the problem. There was nobody around to say, hey, that's wrong. There was no entity around to say that's wrong. When Allison said, it's not fair that those people are working so hard in all those hours and they can't do anything about it. Exactly right. The farmers are going to be the first group to really get involved with trying to create some form of regulation. And the way they're going to create this regulation is that they're going to join together. And they're going to create what is known as the Grange. Also known as the National Grange, also known as the Patrons of Husbandry. It was created by Oliver H. Kelly, and his goal was to try to improve the farmers' social life, and cultural life, and to try to bring in scientific farming. Okay? Scientific farming, you say, wait a minute, that sounds kind of stupid. Scientific farming, you don't need science to be a farmer. Is that true? What is science? Science is what? The pursuit of knowledge. So right now, I'm going to say, and I did this a couple years ago, well, probably about 18 years ago, Valentine's Day is coming up. I decided instead of buying my wife roses, I'm going to buy her 2 rose bushes. So I bought her 2 rose bushes, and I planted them. February 14th, I came outside, look, I built you a rose garden. Oh, how sweet. What happens February 15th? Freeze. What happens to those rose bushes? They're dead. So, what happens? If I would have scientifically looked to see when the next freeze was going to occur, I probably wouldn't have made such a dumb mistake. Okay? As a result, science helps. Why do we put fertilizer on our lands?
Bigger plants.
Bigger plants? And what happens, especially if you're growing tobacco to land? What happens?
They dry up.
Dries up. What dries what up?
The soil.
The tobacco is very nutrient draining from the land. You saw this in the Old South, where farmers who planted tobacco would notice that their crops would be really great at first, and then they would shrivel up. Why? Because all the nutrients were being taken out. We would discover that if we were to put old refuse, what we would consider today compost, into this land, it would return those nutrients. How did we come up with that concept? We observed, we measured, and then we came up with a hypothesis, and we did what? We tested it. As a result, we discovered that you needed to fertilize land. Scientific farming. Okay? Scientific farming. Now, one of the biggest problems farmers had at this time period was that in order for them to get their goods to market, what did they have to do? They had to rely on somebody. Who did they have to rely on? Railroads. And they hated railroads. Why did they hate railroads? Well, railroads could charge whatever they wanted. If you were the only railroad company in Brazos County, and the only way you were going to get your goods to market was for you as a farmer to go on that railroad, and the railroad said it's going to be $5 per bale of cotton, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to do $5 per bale of cotton. The going rate in Mississippi was $1.50. But guess what? In Mississippi, you have other things available too. Along the Mississippi, you can just sail down the Mississippi. Natural competition. Doesn't exist everywhere. So the railroads would charge whatever the market would bear. Okay? They would charge whatever the market would bear. This is a good example, I think. In Nebraska, a farmer who was a member of the Grange would say there are 3 crops in Nebraska. One is corn, one is freight, and one is interest. One is produced by the sweat of farmers, and the others by men who sit in their offices. Farmers were the ones who were raising it, the goods, and trying to ship it. They were trying to survive. People who were charging interest on loans and charging freight rates were just trying to make the most money, squeeze the most money out of the farmers as they possibly could. So it was created to try to counteract the abuses that the farmers saw in the railroads. One of the individuals that they would go after were store owners. Have you ever heard the phrase, cut out the middleman? We're going to cut out the middleman. Yes. What does Amazon often do? Amazon ships goods directly to you and skips over a store. Skips the middleman and makes a lot of money doing it. In return, what would happen is by cutting out the middleman, the Grangers would then create their own stores that they called cooperatives. These cooperatives would then get the same goods that the stores used to, but any profit that was made, they would share it with the members of the Grange. The Grangers are known primarily for two major cases that would go before the Supreme Court. One is Munn versus Illinois in 1887, and Pelt versus Chicago and Northwestern Railroad in 1887. What comes of these two cases is that the Supreme Court rules that a business with a public interest must be subject to public regulation. If there is a business that has a public interest shipping your goods to market, it must be able to be regulated by the public. Where in the Constitution does it say Congress has the right to regulate railroads?
Where?
Why not?
We didn't think that far.
Railroads didn't exist in 1789. They did not exist, so therefore why would we regulate something like this? So as a result, Congress is saying, not really. And a lot, as we'll see, and as we saw with James Blaine, there's a lot of corruption in Congress. There's an example of a bill going before the House of Representatives to be voted on whether or not a company should be allowed to lay railroads through public lands owned by the government. And executives for that railroad company are giving stock certificates to the members of the House of Representatives as the bill is going for a vote. If they vote in favor of it, and if they vote against it, those certificates are worthless. If they are in favor of it, they just became $100,000 richer. I won't say use millionaires, because millionaires are exceptionally rare at this time period. They just became exceptionally rich. What's going to happen? Many times the politicians would do what? They would vote in their own interests. Now, federal regulation would begin in 1886. First is from the federal regulation would slowly come to exist. In 1886, the Supreme Court heard Wabash Railway versus Illinois. And in this, the Supreme Court ruled that states cannot regulate interstate commerce. States cannot regulate interstate commerce. Why not? It's what, Ethan?
That's dumb.
Why is it dumb?
States' rights.
How?
It's their state.
But it's an interstate road.
No, interstate.
Interstate, yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm trying to get you to grasp that road. If I have a rail line that goes from Texas to Louisiana to Mississippi to Alabama, allowing Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama to regulate it would mean there are 4 different sets of regulations that they would have to know and have to be enforced. As a result, the Supreme Court says, no, interstate commerce is regulated by the Commerce Clause of the Constitution. Therefore, it is a federal right. So although it is a blow to the states' rights, saying you can't do this, if the Supreme Court gives Congress a kick in the pants and says, hey, get off your butt and look at this. There's a lot of abuses that you need to address. The next year, Congress would pass the Interstate Commerce Act in 1887, and it created the Interstate Commerce Commission. This is the first attempt of the federal government to regulate railroads in the United States. Now, what it would do is it would forbid excessive rates, irregular rates, rebates, and pools. Excessive rates, irregular rates, rebates, and pools. Now, we talked about a rebate before, where you are shipping a lot of goods. You and the railroad company make a deal, say you're going to pay the full price, but what's going to happen is I am then going to, in turn, give you a rebate, so that instead of you paying $1,000, you're really only going to pay $100. Okay? Now, why is that illegal? You say, I buy things all the time that have rebates. And I get it, and they give me money back. How is that wrong? Well, the difference is that rebate open for everyone that we have today? Yes, that was only available for Ethan because he ships so many goods. And what is a pool? If you pool your money together, what are you doing? We just had the Powerball lottery, the biggest lottery that the world has ever seen. A lot of people put their money together and bought a whole group of tickets. The same thing. People would all put their crops together and would ship to try to get a better deal from the railroad. They would negotiate a better deal with the railroad. That is declared to be illegal. Now, the Interstate Commerce Act set these rules, and it created the Interstate Commerce Commission to be the entity that actually enforced the Interstate Commerce Commission's rules. The Interstate Commerce Commission would investigate and would try violators, offenders, in federal courts. It's a federal crime, therefore it's going to be tried in federal courts. It is not very effective at the very beginning. It's still with us today, but it'll be strengthened by other forms of legislation. In 1890, Congress would pass the Sherman Antitrust Act, relying on the Commerce Clause of the Constitution. It made monopolies illegal. And it also made illegal contracts or conspiracies in corporations to drive out other companies or to prohibit fair trade illegal. Passed in 1890, its first true test came in 1895, U.S. versus B.C. Knight Company. In this case, the Supreme Court ruled that manufacturing is not commerce. Manufacturing is not commerce. Okay, what does that mean? What is commerce? I go to Walmart. I buy a stick of gum. I give them, how much is a pack of gum? 30 cents. What? $1.19? Oh yeah. Gosh. Right? You crazy people with your inflation. So it's $1.20. I am engaging in commerce because money is changing hands. Two people are involved. The Supreme Court rules in U.S. versus B.C. Knight Company in 1895 that this whole process here is manufacturing. Does money change hands? No. Money changes hands when this railroad delivers the product to the store and so another person buys that product. That is commerce. So what happens is the Sherman Antitrust Act is created for pretty good reasons, but it's not going to be very effective. The Supreme Court rules that manufacturing is not commerce, and also you'll notice between this one and the previous one is that there is no regulatory agency created. It was up to the Attorney General to decide whether or not it was going to be tried. And if the Attorney General decided not to try it, the Attorney General decided not to try it. All right, that's where we'll end for the day.